do me a favor. On this Sunday evening, take a seat if you're not sitting down. Focus on what we're going to talk about. Call your family around, if you will, because what I want to discuss with you is crucially important. The America First Committee in 1940 and 41, prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, was almost 1 million members in size. It was led by industrialists. It was led by members of Congress. Its putative spokesman was Charles Lindbergh. It was made up of all kinds of people, patriotic Americans, communists, anti-Semites, and they all had one thing in mind: keep America out of that European war. Because you see, they had pretty much just fought World War I, and the country was going through a horrific economic cycle, depression. They didn't want to fight anymore. And the argument was basically, and they didn't all agree on the strategy, let's build up our military to protect the continental United States. Bombers, other types of air warcraft, ships and subs, but let's stay out of the continent of Europe. We already went there, we already lost enough lives. Franklin Roosevelt was frustrated. Of course, there was the Lend-Lease program in which he got around the Neutrality Act in order to give some support to England, which was under attack by the Nazis. But think about it. The Nazis had moved through much of Eastern Europe. They were attacking England, and we had many, many people who opposed us getting involved because they didn't think we were ready, and they were tired of these endless wars in Europe. Sound familiar? So what happened? Well, we were attacked on December 7th, 1941, and the America First Committee disbanded a week later. And Charles Lindbergh, who'd been an aggressive isolationist for various reasons, became a very controversial figure. He decided to join the war effort and spoke out against any further isolationism. He wanted to join the war effort. FDR said, no, you've caused enough trouble, but he joined it anyway. Now, I'm talking about this because you hear many of the same people who claim to be American firsters who don't even understand what that means. Is an American firster somebody who puts the United States people in a position where they're going to wind up in a world war in a very poor strategic position geographically, with a military that's not properly built up, with young people that are not properly trained up, or we're caught flat-footed? Is that American first? Because I'm hearing a lot of people who suggest to me that that's how they view American first. And they bring up many of the same issues. We have our own economic problems. That's what they said before we were attacked by the Japanese. What about our borders? What about this? What about that? What about this? We're a great nation. We better be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We do have domestic enemies and hugely critical domestic problems that I talk about almost every week here. But you cannot take your eye off foreign enemies either. We must not. The federal government is the only level of government that can protect us. And it hasn't done a very good job lately. So you can point to Afghanistan, 20 years, you can point to Iraq, you can point to whatever you want. We're talking about major power movements, major powerful military states now. We're not talking about forever anything. We're talking about nuclear power, among other things. Now, let me give you some examples. Senior U.S. general warns China's military progress is stunning as U.S. is hampered by brutal bureaucracy. As you know, as I speak, the communist Chinese are terrorizing Taiwan. But they've been doing more than that. In the wake of China's test of hypersonic missiles, the second most senior U.S. general said that the pace at which China's military is developing capabilities is stunning. While U.S. development suffers from brutal bureaucracy, the outgoing Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General John Hyten, echoed Secretary of Defense Austin's characterization of China as a pacing threat, while calling Russia the most imminent threat. Calling China a pacing threat is a useful term because the pace at which China is moving is stunning. The pace they're moving and the trajectory they're on will surpass Russia and the United States if we don't do something to change it. It will happen. So I think we have to do something. Although we're making marginal progress, he's talking about hypersonic nuclear weapons, the Department of Defense is still unbelievably bureaucratic and slow. He said the hypersonic and nuclear weapons China are building are only partially to do with Taiwan. Rather, they're meant for the United States of America. We have to assume that, and we have to plan for that, and we have to be ready. And that's the position they're putting us in with the weapons they're building. We're not provoking them. Then we have Jim Inhofe, who's been in the Armed Services Committee a very, very long time. His son was a fighter pilot who died in a terrible crash. Real clear defense. The United States defense budget is larger than the next 10 countries combined. You've heard this from some of these elements I was just talking about. And he said, you hear it all the time. He says from progressives, but we're also hearing it from isolationists in the Republican Party and in the media. He said, in their arguments to cut funding for our military, it's time to remove this false talking point from our vernacular. Here's the truth. Our defense budget is almost certainly smaller than the combined Chinese and military budgets after you adjust for basic economic realities. Let's be clear, he says, because the Chinese and Russians manipulate the defense budgets, measuring their actual spending is very difficult. Both Beijing and Moscow lie about just about everything. So it should be no surprise they intentionally hide significant parts of their defense spending. The Chinese don't report any research and development spending in their defense budget, and a significant portion of their space program and basing costs are omitted. So he said they're not telling us what they spend. But he goes further. He says the 2017 Chinese defense budget of $228 billion actually equates to $467 billion, according to the Heritage Foundation. If you adjust that 2017 number to reflect 4 years of consistent and significant growth of the Chinese defense budget, as has been reported, that puts China's defense budget at about $604 billion in 2021. And when you add Russia, which spends about the same as Britain or the same as France, combined, they are spending more than we are. And he points out the labor costs and other costs are much less because these are police states, of course. What else? China, BBC, M15, and FBI heads warn of immense threat. The heads of UK and US security services have made an unprecedented joint appearance to warn of the threat from China. They've never had a joint appearance before. FBI Director Christopher Wray said China was the biggest long-term threat to our economic and national security, and it interfered in politics, including recent elections. M15 head Ken McCullum said his service had more than doubled its work against Chinese activity in the last 3 years and had to double it again. M15 is now running 7 times as many investigations related to activities of the Communist Party of China compared to 2018. FBI's Wray warned that if China was to forcibly take Taiwan, it would represent one of the most horrific business disruptions the world has ever seen, and the first ever joint public appearance just about a month or so ago. What else? It's all in front of our eyes. China's buying up American farms. Washington wants to crack down. Politico, the push to drain China's influence from the U.S. economy has reached America's farm country, as congressional lawmakers from both parties are looking at measures to crack down on farm purchases of prime agricultural real estate. The debate over farm ownership comes amid broader efforts by Congress and the Biden administration to curb the nation's economic reliance on China, especially in key industries like food, semiconductors, minerals deemed crucial to the supply chain. Chinese firms have expanded their presence in American agriculture over the last decade by snapping up farmland and purchasing major agribusinesses like pork processing giant in Virginia, Smithfield Foods. By the start of 2020, China owners controlled about 192,000 agricultural acres in the U.S., worth almost $2 billion, including land used for farming, ranching, forestry, according to the Agriculture Department. And we also know they just bought a ton of land next to a major base. I believe it was in North Dakota. What else? Washington Examiner. Federal Reserve has been repeatedly targeted by the Chinese government as part of a large-scale economic espionage effort. Senator Robert Portman released a minority staff report for the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee that details how the Federal Reserve System has been targeted by Beijing. The FBI has repeatedly warned about China's 1,000 Talents economic espionage program. What else? Chinese investment near Panama Canal, Strait of Magellan, major concern for U.S. Southern Command. Whatever happened to the Monroe Doctrine? Remember that Ronald Reagan, a conservative, opposed the treaty to give up the Panama Canal. He feared that we'd lose control over it, and he was opposed by Republicans in his own party. Restrictions to the passage of traffic through the Panama Canal and the Strait of Magellan, and we built it. as China moves aggressively to expand its footprint across Central and South America, are the top concerns of current U.S. Southern Command head told a Senate panel. Panama PRC-based companies are engaged in or bidding for several projects related to the Panama Canal, a global strategic choke point, including port operations on both ends of the canal, water management, and a logistics park. Likewise, the Chinese have invested heavily in space research project in Argentina that would allow Beijing to track U.S. satellites, and also won the rights to build facilities near the Magellan Strait that would also give China access to Antarctica, where it's also building, I think it's on its 5th site. Beijing's investments in Central and South American infrastructure, particularly ports, follow the pattern it developed in Africa. Right now, the Chinese have 29 port projects across Central and South America, including a major one in El Salvador that has economic implications for other Central American countries. What else? Chinese company eyes Solomon Islands deep water port. My great uncle fought there at Guadalcanal. And Australia is very, very worried about this. A Chinese state-owned company is negotiating to buy a forestry plantation with a deep water port and World War II airstrip in the Solomon Islands. Our airstrip. Amid persistent concerns that China wants to establish a naval foothold in the South Pacific country, a delegation from China Forestry Group visited the plantation that covers most of the Kalambangar Island in 2019, asking questions about the length of the wharf and the depth of the water while showing little interest in the trees, reports Australian Broadcasting Corporation. What else? China's building a new military port on Africa's Atlantic coast. The port of Bata in Central African nation of Equatorial Guinea is set to become China's first permanent military presence on the west coast of Africa. The west coast of Africa? U.S. officials told the Wall Street Journal this meant that Chinese warships might be able to rearm and refit in a location opposite to the east coast of the United States. In October, the U.S. government sent a senior national security advisor to the tiny oil-producing country of Equatorial Guinea to call on officials there to resist China's overture. It appears it didn't succeed. Didn't succeed. What else? China's relentlessly trying to peel away Japan's resolve on disputed islands. They're making claims to these Japanese islands, and they're already trying to settle them. In the East China Sea, South China Sea, U.S. warns China against attack on the Philippines forces. It's making claims to navigable waters and islands off the Philippines. I mean, the Philippines is an island nation. It's got scores and scores and scores of islands. Threatening Japan, threatening the Philippines, as I speak, threatening Taiwan, devouring Hong Kong. China is encroaching on India's territory once again. As the world is caught up fighting COVID and so forth, China is sliding and pressuring out its borders and using its neighbors' territory as bargaining chips. China is building an entire village inside Indian territory in a border state, has once again laid bare the deceitful plans of China. While this is not unprecedented, what has taken observers by surprise, this means China has not stopped its aggressive stance against India since last year. What else? The controversial Confucius Institutes are returning to the U.S. schools under a new name. They've been banned in large part in this country, so they're calling them new things. And they're spreading like wildfire from one college and university to the next. What else? The woke takeover of the U.S. military. Are we prepared? The woke left views the military as a crucial ideological battlefield, our military. And much of the brass and civilian leadership of the Pentagon are prepared to fight on behalf of the woke cause. This is from the Heritage Foundation. The Defense Department is now reportedly considering hiring a private company to monitor the free speech of military personnel on social media using keywords or algorithms that by their very nature reflect the perspective of those who select the words and write the algorithms. The relentless drive to enforce conformity within the military with a preferred leftist narrative is troubling, especially as it reinforces this Marxist tendency. What else? NBC News. Every branch of the military is struggling to make its 2022 recruiting goals. What's happening is more and more young people don't want to go into the military. Some of them are out of weight. Some of them have been using drugs, so they don't meet the criteria. Many of them have had enough of this wokeism and the pronouns and the white supremacy and CRT, so they want nothing to do with it. Another, the Biden administration's response. It's worse than you know. DOJ shuts down China-focused anti-espionage program. It shut it down that was started under Trump. Why? Because it might be confused as an attack on their ethnicity. Can you believe this? Soft on China think tanker to handle China portfolio for Biden, Jessica Lee of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. It is a radical organization funded by Koch and Soros. In a May 2021 essay co-authored with another former Quincy Institute scholar, Lee cautioned the U.S. government's warnings about Communist Chinese Party malign influence stoked discourse that is alarmist in nature and could exacerbate McCarthyist attacks against Asian Americans. Specifically, she warned that criticizing individuals and organizations linked to the Communist Party for those ties is unnecessary and harms U.S. national security. And finally, although it's not final, one of our guests is going to discuss this. Cobalt may become scarce for U.S. car companies. All this push for electric vehicles, all this push for batteries can't work without cobalt. The Congo, with its vast mineral resources, has become the equivalent of Saudi Arabia as the world turns to renewable energy sources. Despite the consumer demand and the allure of EVs, electric vehicles, and the environmental consciousness of the West, most of the sources for material used in EV batteries are found elsewhere. And matter of fact, the vast majority is found in the Congo. And guess who controls it? Guess who controls the cobalt in the Congo? We used to. The Communist Chinese.
Want to see more Mark Levin? Go to levintv.com and subscribe now.